The moment those words left her mouth, I felt my heart sink. "Don't talk to the old lady. She's just the cleaner." My daughter-in-law's voice echoed through the hospital lobby, sharp and dismissive. For a moment, the world around me blurred. The sound of footsteps, the chatter of nurses, everything faded. I stood there, holding my old cleaning cart, my hands trembling. She didn't know it was me. She didn't recognize me. Her husband's mother, standing there in a faded uniform, mopping the floor she walked on so proudly. I wanted to speak, to say her name, but something stopped me. My throat closed up, and all I could do was watch her walk away, leaving the scent of expensive perfume in her wake and the bitter taste of humiliation in my chest. I had taken the cleaning job quietly after my husband passed away 2 years ago. We had spent our entire savings on his medical bills, and though my son tried to help, I didn't want to be a burden. He had his own family now, his wife, his home, his life, so I told him I was fine, that I had enough to live on. In truth, I had nothing but my small pension, barely enough for rent and food. The cleaning job at the hospital came as a blessing, even if it meant sweeping floors at 64. Every morning I would put on my uniform, tie my gray hair into a bun, and whisper to myself, "This is dignity, not shame." But that day, when my own daughter-in-law spoke those cruel words, I felt small, invisible, and broken. She was standing at the reception desk, speaking to the nurse about her checkup. Her tone was confident, her appearance elegant. She had always carried herself like she belonged somewhere higher. I didn't blame her for that. She came from a wealthy family, raised in luxury. My son loved her deeply, and I had accepted her with an open heart. But it was clear she had never truly accepted me. Even after marriage, she kept her distance. Polite smiles, short visits, quick excuses. I always thought she was shy or busy, never unkind, but that day her words told me otherwise. "Don't talk to the old lady. She's just the cleaner. Just the cleaner." That's all I was to her. I stood there, frozen, gripping the mop tightly as the receptionist looked at me awkwardly. My eyes burned, but I refused to let a single tear fall. Dignity, I reminded myself. I quietly turned away and continued mopping the corridor, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. But inside my heart was screaming, how strange life is. The same hands that once held my son when he was a baby were now cleaning floors for strangers. The same woman who had raised a kind, educated man was now being looked at like she didn't belong. That evening, when my shift ended, I walked home in silence, the memory of her voice replaying in my mind like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I didn't tell my son. I couldn't. He adored his wife, and I didn't want to create tension between them. So I kept it to myself. Every day after that, I went to work with my head down, hoping I wouldn't see her again. But fate is cruel in its irony. 2 weeks later, she came again. This time she was with my son. I spotted them from afar, holding hands, smiling. My heart skipped. I wanted to hide, but before I could turn, my son saw me. "Mom," he said, his voice full of surprise. I froze. My daughter-in-law's face turned pale as she realized what was happening. She looked at me, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide in shock. I could see it all. The recognition, the guilt, the shame. "Mom, what are you doing here?" my son asked gently, stepping closer. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. I felt exposed, embarrassed, and small all over again. "You work here?" he asked softly. I nodded, avoiding his eyes. His hand tightened around mine, and he whispered, "You didn't have to hide this." I tried to smile. "It's honest work, son," I said quietly, but my daughter-in-law couldn't even meet my gaze. She stood there, her head bowed, her face red with shame. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked fragile, and for a brief moment, I saw not pride, but remorse. That evening, my son came to visit me after work. He looked sad, almost broken. "Mom," he said, "why didn't you tell me you needed help?" I smiled faintly and said, "Because I didn't want to take away your peace. You have your life and I have mine." He shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "You've given me everything, Mom. You shouldn't have to live like this." I gently placed my hand on his. "I live with dignity, son. That's all that matters." He nodded silently, but I could see how much it hurt him. I didn't ask about his wife, but I knew she must have told him everything. A few days later, my supervisor called me into the office. "You can take a few weeks off," she said kindly. "Your daughter-in-law came to see me. She insisted we let you rest." I was confused. I hadn't expected that. When I returned home that evening, I found my daughter-in-law waiting outside my door, holding a small bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers. She looked nervous. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. We sat together in the living room, the silence heavy between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mama." Those 3 words broke the walls I had built around my heart. She began to cry, explaining how ashamed she felt, how her arrogance had blinded her. "I was raised to think respect comes from status," she said softly. "But that day, when I realized you were the cleaner, I also realized how wrong I've been. You work hard. You live with pride. I've never met anyone stronger." I listened quietly, my eyes moist. I could hear the sincerity in her voice. "Please forgive me," she whispered, taking my hands in hers. "I didn't deserve your kindness, but I promise I'll try to be the daughter you always wanted." In that moment, all the bitterness I had felt melted away. I saw not the proud woman who had insulted me, but a young woman who was still learning what humility and love truly meant. I squeezed her hand and said softly, "We all make mistakes, my dear. What matters is that we learn from them." She cried harder then, resting her head on my lap like a child seeking comfort. I stroked her hair, remembering how I once comforted my son the same way. That evening, we sat together for hours, talking about life, love, and forgiveness. From that day forward, things changed between us. She began visiting often, bringing groceries, helping around the house, even cooking with me on weekends. The distance that once separated us began to fade. She started calling me Mama, not out of obligation, but with genuine affection. And for the first time since my husband's passing, the house felt warm again. My son, too, was happier, seeing his wife and mother bond. He often said, "I don't know what happened that day, but it brought our family closer." One afternoon, I visited the hospital, not for work, but to drop off some homemade lunch for my old colleagues. As I walked through the lobby, I saw my daughter-in-law talking to the same receptionist. She smiled warmly and said, "This is my mother-in-law, the strongest woman I know." The receptionist looked at me with admiration, and I couldn't help but smile. That moment healed something deep inside me. Respect that comes from understanding is worth more than anything that comes from fear or status. In time, I retired from my cleaning job. My son and daughter-in-law insisted on supporting me. But more than financial help, what I received was love, the kind that grows from remorse, forgiveness, and change. Every Mother's Day, she writes me a letter, always ending with the same words. "Thank you for forgiving me before I learned what respect truly means." Sometimes, when I look back, I realize life has a strange way of teaching us lessons. Pain often brings clarity, and humiliation can become the root of compassion. That one cruel sentence, "She's just the cleaner," became the spark that transformed us both. Now, whenever I see an older woman working quietly in a corner, I make sure to greet her with respect, because I know what it feels like to be unseen. I've learned that dignity doesn't come from what you do, but how you do it, and kindness is the truest measure of a person's worth. Years later, my daughter-in-law still blushes whenever that story is mentioned, but she never hides from it. She says it reminds her of who she doesn't want to be, and of the woman who taught her the meaning of humility. And as for me, I've long forgiven her. Because forgiveness, I learned, doesn't just free the one who hurt you, it frees your own heart too. Love built on understanding is far stronger than pride built on ignorance. That day in the hospital could have broken me, but instead, it mended 2 hearts that had forgotten how to see each other. Life gave me a second chance at family, not through perfection, but through the power of grace. So now, when I hear someone say, "She's just the cleaner," I smile gently and whisper to myself, "No one is just anything. We all have a story, and every story deserves respect."